Hello and welcome to The Stack. This week we feature a new magazine about chairs. We look at the art of set design with Piers Hanmer, and a magazine looking back at the best of music journalism from another era. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show in South Korea to talk about the new title from the same thing as Magazine B, the South Korean brand documentary publication. The new title is called Magazine C, a quarterly title dedicated to chairs. Every issue is dedicated to one iconic chair. The most recent issue, issue 4, is all about the fauteuil Grand Comfort, designed in 1928 by Le Corbusier, Pierre Hanmer, and Charlotte Perrien. To find out more about Magazine C, it was a pleasure to talk to their editor, Sunjin Kim. Sunjin Kim, editor at Magazine C, a pleasure talking to you because I am a big fan of what you guys do. Of course, Magazine C is related to Magazine B, which I'm sure a lot of our Stack listeners will know. My first question to you, can you introduce Magazine C to our listeners?
Magazine C dedicates each issue to a single iconic chair. In each issues, we explore lifestyles and homes of people who use the chair and how it's made in the factory and the story of the designer behind the chair. And we launched in June 2024 with our first issue on John Prouvé's standard chair.
And there's so much to know about a chair. I think if you mentioned to someone, this is a magazine about chairs, they'll be like, oh, really? The whole magazine? But when you read, you totally get it, right? Because you go behind the scenes, you speak with the designers, the people that actually own the chairs as well. So there's a big scope to a single chair, right?
Exactly. We chose the chair because chairs are the most cutting edge objects among all the furniture. Because there are many, many possibilities of creativity in chairs. The form, the material, the manufacturing process. So I would like to quote Charlotte and Peter Thiel, who are the very famous design authors who also wrote the 1000 Chairs by Tashin. I interviewed them for our third issue, Louis Ghost, and they said, the chairs, the functionality of the chairs sitting is still there, but the form, the colors, the materials, or the techniques, they always kept changing. So it's the perfect object to see how the design history has evolved. And I think that explains perfectly why we chose the chairs, because we can see the design history through chairs and architecture, lifestyle, all the changes of that. And also, the chair is a very universal object that everybody all around the world is using every single day. So I think it has a lot of possibility to be related by all the people around the world.
Absolutely. And, doing this interview, I'm sat in a chair. You're also sat in a chair. We're working on chairs. When we're at home, we're at chairs. I think it's so much part of our daily life in a way, right?
Exactly.
Let's talk about Magazine C. So, of course, you're from the same publisher as Magazine B, which we all know, this beautiful documentary kind of title about specific brands. Although it's a South Korean publication, I think all your publications, they have quite an international scope, right? So tell us a bit more in terms of the market. I mean, in terms of your market, do you have the majority in South Korea, or is it perhaps evenly split between South Korea and the rest of the world? Tell us a bit more about that.
About 10 years ago, Magazine B has started in Korea, and we just started last year. So to compare Magazine B and C, there will be some differences. So when Magazine B started, it was mostly focusing on Korean market. And then we found out that there are wonderful readers who are knowledgeable and very passionate about deep stories about one brand internationally. So that's how Magazine B got grown up through all the time. And now I would say for both Magazine B and C, the readers are pretty much very international scope.
That's fantastic. And there's a new issue out of Magazine C, the fourth already. Just been out for a few days. Can you tell us which chair was chosen?
We dedicated our fourth issue to a very special furniture series, and it's called Fauteuil Grand Confort. It's the French original name, but is mostly well known for LC series. But the LC series stands for Le Corbusier, but actually the LC4, LC3, the iconic armchair, was designed by not only Le Corbusier, but also his very close colleague, Charles Perriand and Pierre Jeanneret. So we wanted to respect the credit of the designers. So we followed the original name. And inside the fourth issue, you will be meeting the most passionate, most knowledgeable design lovers, because they are passionate people about Bauhaus designs, mid-century designs, timeless classics, and you will be able to see more stories, not only in Le Corbusier, but the users all around the world who are trying to incorporate their iconic design into their own lifestyle and everyday life.
I have a question for your group. Of course, as I said, you're based in Seoul, in South Korea. But do you have teams outside South Korea? Because when you read Magazine C, it's so knowledgeable. It feels like it was made for insiders as well, for people that know the brands, that know who is collecting what. How does that work? Do you have special eyes around every capitals of the world?
I always get these questions because especially for our segment called 5 Cities, 5 Homes, where we visit 5 different homes all around the world, has that one iconic chair. And it's pretty tricky for us to find the homes and design collectors the exact iconic chair at their home. But also, we are part of, our team has a very deep background experiences in design field, including my director who has worked in design field more than 20 years. So she has been around the whole world, including Milan Design Week, London Design Week, everything. So all those networks we have built, they're a big help as a correspondent, but also always visiting the manufacturing factory and the headquarters of the manufacturing companies. So that also helps our knowledge.
Sunjin, and now I have kind of a personal question about the South Korean magazine market, because we've been discussing from many countries, especially the US and in Europe. Is it quite a healthy market? Do you feel are South Koreans still going there and buying their magazines on a newsstand? And this is not just for your magazine, but in general, what's kind of your perception about that?
I mean, many people doubt about the life of magazines, especially printed magazines, not Instagram magazines or online magazines. But I would say on these kind of niche topics, printing is the most appropriate material, I would say, because for especially chairs, it's still a very analog and physical object. And people who love chairs and who want to know more about chairs would still go for the printed magazines and really want to feel the printed stories. Also, I wanted to mention this, the label on our cover, it also works as a label for chairs. It's because we wanted to emphasize that our magazine is not just for the design knowledge, but also we wanted our readers to feel that through buying our magazine, I wanted them to feel that they're owning the chair, because it's not, the iconic chairs are not always the most affordable objects. So, but also at the same time, the chairs are still very enjoyable and delightful object, even though you don't own it at your own home. By just seeing them, by just knowing how it was made, you can still very enjoy the object. So we wanted to emphasize that by the label design on the magazine. So in this case, owning the printed physical magazine can work as the feeling of owning the chair. So I think in this kind of very niche market, printed magazines can still really work.
I agree. And you know what? I'm on the hunt for 4 new chairs for my house. I'm really looking out for inspiration. I think Magazine C is perfect for that as well. Thank you, Sunjin Kim from Magazine C. You can find out more about the title on en.magazine-b.com. And now to a topic that I always wanted to discuss here on The Stack, the role of a set designer on a fashion shoot. And who better than Piers Hanmer to come in? The celebrated set designer just released a book called Distracted by Fashion, a compilation of his work in the last 20 years for publications such as American Vogue, W, Interview, and many others. Piers collaborated with the best in business, from Annie Leibovitz to Stephen Klein and more. It was a pleasure to welcome him to our studio. Piers Hanmer, welcome to The Stack. Let's talk about set design, a little bit more about your work and your new book as well, Distracted by Fashion, which is, first of all, I'm so glad you're here because I don't think here on The Stack we interviewed a set designer for those amazing fashion shoots before. So a real pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm a set design virgin here.
And before we talk a little bit more about your work, why did you decide to do this book? Is it because you wanted people to pay attention actually for this beautiful art? I mean, without your job, we wouldn't have these amazing photo shoots that we grew up on Vogue, Vanity Fair, and many other magazines.
I think really it started during the pandemic, and I was having a socially distanced walk with Craig McDean, who's a lot of his photography is in the book. And he sort of turned around and he said, "Why have you never done a book? I mean, your sets, were fantastic. We need to see them because they just get sort of locked into photographers' archives and never seen again." And so I started sort of working on the idea, and he had also said, "Look, you can just raid my archives, just take whatever you want," which was very helpful. It was also really the beginning of me putting this project together. I'd also realized that as the years had progressed and the budgets had essentially finished within magazines, or rather the budgets had become smaller and smaller, my ability, or the set designer's ability, to sort of create these insane sort of worlds out of nothing, diminishing fast. So I just sort of gathered my favorite editorials from a sort of almost 20-year period. Distracted by Fashion is the result.
I love the title as well. Talking about budgets, I mean, it is such a shame because I think with the work you do, I think that's what brings magic to the reader in a way. It's not just a simple kind of, you're in studio, somebody's taking pictures. It is about the furniture. It is about all the small details as well. Do you generally think this is an art that is getting lost a little bit?
I think certainly the art that I was able to practice and other set designers of my era were able to practice, it probably is coming to an end in many ways. It almost feels quite analog, and the way I sort of put the book together, it's very much like a scrapbook. It's just a visual book of imagery. It's not in any chronological order or, anything like that. And then also when I started putting the book together, I ended up rephotographing all the editorial spreadsheets because by doing that, they felt somehow more archival. And it also spoke to a period of time that sort of doesn't really exist so much now. I think the next generation, they will find their way. AI is, everyone's talking about AI right now, and it clearly is going to and is already having a huge impact on the industry. Why spend a lot of money to hire someone to build a set when with a handful of clever prompts you can create a set digitally? So that will change the industry, but I think it'll also change the way we look at things creatively. And someone who is creatively good at prompting AI will be able to be very talented and very creative and will create the world as they see it. So I think it just evolves. I don't think it ends.
Talking about this beautiful work you've done that we can actually see it in the book, I'm very curious about something. Of course, the photographer there, the models are there, the editors have asked you, to do whatever sets they wanted. How much time did you have in advance to do certain sets? Because it is quite a lot of hard work, but I know sometimes how those things are quite last minute at times. But I wonder what's your experience with that?
I mean, sometimes I would get 10 days notice. Sometimes I get 6 days notice. Other times I had a handful of days notice. I mean, Edward Enninful did the sort of forward with me, and we were having a talk about those days, and he was remembering a period of time when he was the editor of W magazine, and he had to kill a story for some reason. And I think I literally had sort of 3 days, 2 days or something to come up with a new concept. And so it was a complete scramble, and it was this sort of insane world where I just got old beds and sofas and covered them in flowers and plants as if they were in this sort of otherworldly space. That happened very quickly, and it's sort of you turn up on set and you don't really know what you're going to do. You have a faint idea of what you're going to do, but you just sort of wing it and hope it's going to look good. And if it doesn't look good, you sort of tear it down and do something else. And I think in a way that was the fun of that period of time, that you could experiment, but you could also make mistakes, and you would have the time to fix it.
One question, when you started, were you always thinking about editorial, about magazines, or did you ever think about, film, TV, or anything else really?
No, not at all. And actually, I mean, the reason I called the book Distracted by Fashion was I really had no interest in set design or any interest in fashion, really. And 20 years later, still kind of don't, if I'm absolutely honest. I like colour, I like shapes, I like textures. And so I see the world in that way. But fashion is really not something I'm particularly interested in. And nor was editorial. I was living in California, working as a photographer and, needing to make extra money, essentially. And I literally fell into it. I mean, I ended up assisting various different set designers. And I remember it was a set for Stephen Meisel for American Vogue. And I think it was Nicole Kidman they were shooting. It was like the cover story. And I remember walking on set, and the set designer who had been hired to create the world had sort of created this insane space in a essentially all-white photo studio. And I just remember being struck by it, and I thought, this is incredible. I love this. You can just create these tiny little worlds for photographers to find a narrative and to find a story in. So I really just completely stumbled into it and just got it. It just sort of felt quite a straightforward.
Quite organic in a way.
Totally organic. I had no training. I mean, I went to art school and trained as a photographer. So maybe that is a training in one respect. I don't know. I understand how things stack together through a lens. So I'm sure that was kind of a useful training. But other than that, no, I always feel, assistants of mine over the years, and they sort of go to school and they do theatre design and all these sort of things, and they're desperate to sort of get in. And of course, in my time, you just fell into it. So no, I completely fell into it.
And I want to talk about some of your collaborations. Of course, you worked with some of the biggest names in the industry. Annie Leibovitz, for example, comes to mind as well. So was that right at the beginning, or you've worked with her for many years at Vogue, Vanity Fair, among other titles, right?
Well, actually, Annie Leibovitz started my career in many ways. I was an assistant still when I was working on her sets. And because I'd lived in Los Angeles, the set designer that I was assisting at the time when I was based in New York would send me on all her shoots, because Annie was always on shooting in LA the whole time, shooting all these actors or sports people or whatever. It became a situation where I was in Los Angeles every second week of the month, essentially. We, of course, were working very closely, and one day she just sort of turned to me and said, I'm watching what you're doing. I want to hire you direct as my set designer. Do you know what you're doing, basically, if I give you this opportunity? And it was, of course, she's one of the greatest photographers in the world, and it was one of those sort of moments, and you're like, I'm never going to get an opportunity like this again. And I remember we were sitting in I think it was the back lot of Paramount Studios, all having lunch, just sort of sitting on a grassy area somewhere. And I remember distinctly, and it was just over 20 years ago, but I remember it was like yesterday, and I was like, sure, I know what I'm doing. But she saw something clearly in me and how I'd been working with her. And she gave me a chance, and literally my next job after that was set designing the cover for Vanity Fair. So yeah, sort of my career sort of went 0 to 60 pretty fast.
I know it's going to be hard to say, but I mean, I wonder, perhaps something that is featured in the book. Is there a shoot that you always remember, quite memorable? I mean, there's been so many, from Kate Blanchett's Vogue cover to Jude Law on Vanity Fair. I mean, you pick.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have any children, and I imagine if I did, it's sort of choosing who's your favorite.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that because they're all different, and I have the memory of a goldfish, and I'm also very easily bored. So I always tried to never replicate myself when I created a set, and so I sort of loved them all. And, over a 20-year period, I mean, I must have done hundreds of editorials. And there's really only about, I think it's 50 in the book. I worked and we just sort of were really quite diligent that unless they really sort of stood out, I simply didn't want to include them. So those are my 50 favorite, essentially. For whatever reason, they challenged me creatively. I remember having a good time on them. I mean, it's interesting. It's such an emotional experience when you're putting a set together, and it's so dependent on all the people and all the team that you work with working alongside you that I had a good time pretty much on all those sets. But there were certain editorial stories that I would flick through, and I remember having a miserable time, or one of the team there was particularly problematic and just hard work, and it just been like it just felt like pulling teeth to create that set. And if I had a bad feeling about it or a bad memory, I actually didn't put in the book because I felt the book was really, I wanted it to be my absolutely favorite moments, in working for legacy media.
It feels like a celebration, the book, in a way, to me, right?
Completely a celebration. And that was the whole reason I wanted to celebrate a period of time that in many ways doesn't exist in the same way, and bring it all back. But also to the way I worked with these amazing designers who thought they'd have this all done in a couple of months, and it just took us about 18 months to do because there's so much layering of editorial stories alongside behind-the-scenes images and some drawings or inspiration images. I'm always taking photographs, on my iPhone if I'm walking down the street and I love the patina or something or the color of something else. So we sort of added those pictures in as well, just as a way to move the book along but also to slow it down so it wasn't just sort of an endless book of old editorial fashion stories. But it really is there to be a celebration. It's a sort of celebration of fashion. It's a celebration of amazing creativity by all the departments, not just the set designer, not just the photographer, but the stylist, the hairstylist, the makeup artist. We all worked incredibly hard on those days to try and make the best image that we possibly could, to try and make an image that you felt you hadn't seen before. That was always the challenge. And I hope that within this book I've sort of managed to capture a few of them.
I think you did. And Piers, you're always a busy man still. And although perhaps, you mentioned that the world have changed, especially the budgets in magazines, but you're doing still a lot of work for fashion brands. I mean, so is that where you're focusing your work at the moment?
Yes, I mean, it's very much. My career hasn't changed really, other than I do less editorial, far less editorial. We now do it once or twice a season, and it's almost like, oh my God, let's get the old team back. What fun. There's so little editorial, whereas when I started, it was probably about 70% of my work. So it kept me very busy. But also, a dirty little secret about it all was that it wasn't paid. So invariably, I would never get paid for all those jobs. You would do that and you would work with those photographers because the unspoken rule was that when they got booked an advertising job, if they were doing a Calvin Klein or a Prada or whatever it was, they would then take you as part of their team. That's when you made money. And so now most of my work is advertising. It's just paid work, and creative directors give me a concept and I flesh it out and make it happen for them. And it's great. And it's obviously very challenging still and great fun, but the difference between doing something where a creative director gives you a creative concept and asks you to essentially problem solve it, when back in the days of editorial, I would have editors coming to me going, we need an idea for this, go and do it. And it was a much more creatively exciting and freeing time for me because I could just pluck stuff out of my head, and a week later it would be in a photo studio and the models would be inside working alongside it.
Thank you, Piers. You can pre-order Distracted by Fashion on moralbooks.com. And finally on the show, a new title, Music Journalism. No Way Back resurfaces long-lost subculture and music journalism from 1977 to 1989, sourcing from titles ranging from smash hits to Village Voice. The title celebrates their work, sometimes forgotten or repurposed without credit. And to discuss this beautiful new project, I welcome to our studio No Way Back's co-founder, Andy Kreisel. Andy Kreisel, welcome to The Stack, to our studio. We're here to discuss your new magazine, No Way Back, and music magazines in general, which is my favorite kind. My first question to you, Andy, before we go into the new title, are you a music journalist? Is that your area of interest, or is this a new thing for you?
Well, thank you for having me. Am I a music journalist? I definitely was a music journalist. It was the first thing I was way back in the 1990s, more by accident than design. I became a music and subculture journalist. I used to write for The Face and ID and Enemy and Mixmag and a whole bunch of other titles. And then I spent about 25 years running agencies, a creative agency and a strategy agency. And now I've sold those agencies and I've come out the other side, and I seem to have somehow ended up becoming a music journalist all over again.
It's a circle, right?
It's a circle. It's life's circle.
And it's a beautiful idea, No Way Back, because it does look back, to music, to print, talking about music, but in a different way. Can you explain to us what the title is?
Yeah, and I think that looking back in a different way is quite important, really. I mean, it is unashamedly about the past. It's all about curating really interesting journalism and photo stories from the past, pieces that have otherwise been lost. So it's about resurfacing them, but it's also trying to make them relevant today. We're pretty averse to the idea of nostalgia as this sort of thing, which means you're scared of the future, that you're sort of hiding from today and tomorrow. So we came up with this strapline, learning from, not longing for the past. So it's all about the through line. So what can we learn from this kind of material, these kind of creative endeavours that will shape the next wave of creativity? So yeah, it's about the past, but it's interesting. We're trying to play with nostalgia and do it in a kind of a more intelligent kind of way.
And the design is very intelligent. Of course, there's new design made by you, but also you show the spreads of some of the publications and the stories, like the first story here about Kraftwerk. I mean, what a great way to start a magazine as well, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think, is a really powerful part of it, really. The sort of the layers to it. So yes, we rerun the articles and the photo shoots, but, we show the material in situ as it was back then. And I think it's really revealing. It sort of shows the journey of media, shows the journey of print, of music magazines, and how they've evolved over time. And yeah, that Kraftwerk one is particularly special. It's in a magazine called Ritz, which was kind of a precursor to The Face and ID in the UK.
For every issue, do you plan a different theme, or is it kind of a selection of music stories from the past? I mean, is there any logic to it, or is it more of an organic?
I would say probably organic over logic. I mean, our brief is looking at the past and trying to do it in interesting ways. For now, it's mainly print media, but we're interested in other formats as well. Issue 2 is in production. Yeah, it's another sort of deep dive. We've got a different set of stories. We definitely sort of push the boundaries a little bit. So this second one moves a little bit more into the 1990s. We're drawing from some different titles as well, just trying to unearth different aspects of music culture and subculture that haven't seen the light of day for a very long time. And I think what I find really interesting as well is all of these stories are kind of from a year zero of these moments. So I find it fascinating that these writers, these photographers, they had no idea that people would be talking about graffiti culture and hip-hop and disco literally 50 years later. So there's no sort of revisionism or post-rationalization going on. It's literally what was happening in that moment in time, which I think is quite fascinating.
That's such a good point. And talking about music media today, especially music magazines, let's say, I got to be honest, Andy, at some point, maybe 5 years ago or something, I was a bit concerned. My God, my favorite music magazines, they were dying out. But I genuinely feel there's a resurgence of new titles, perhaps different from what they used to be, but nevertheless a resurgence. Would you agree with that? Or?
I would agree, and I guess that's the story of kind of independent print media and magazines in general. There is a rebirth. I don't think it's ever necessarily going to be, stacked on the high street like it once was, but there's a different way to sort of build community around print media than there was before. And yeah, I mean, I guess we've all become so reliant on streaming, but there's maybe a little bit of a push back the other way now that, we do need some ways to filter our way through music, and magazines are a good way way to explore and to develop a taste in music, which you can't necessarily get just through absorbing everything that comes at you via the algorithm. So I think it's sort of early days, and I'm sure there'll be sort of twists and turns, but it feels like print media in general and music magazines specifically are starting to find a place again.
Oh, I'm very happy. But at the same time, I've read a very recent article saying that music critique especially, it's quite difficult today because of the group of fans. Everybody becomes quite, it's quite intense in a way. Would you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've it's a long time
compared to your time in the 90s.
Absolutely, where you could, in the 90s, you would review away, you'd critique an album or a live performance, and you were very much the ones leading that story. The fans are out there, but they didn't really have a platform, and now the fans have a platform, and that's great in many ways. But yeah, music criticism is probably a place of much more friction, I would imagine, than it was back then.
I'm scared to criticize certain artists.
Absolutely.
I've got to be honest.
Yeah,
here.
you've got to keep your head down sometimes.
I wonder if you could give us a taster for the first issue. We mentioned Kraftwerk, but what else actually can people find out in the first issue of No Way Back?
Yeah, so there's the Kraftwerk piece. What else do we have in there? There's a couple of really good photo shoots, one by Graham Smith, which is all around the early days of the New Romantics in the UK, which had this very glamorous image, but it kind of shows the New Romantics on the bus drinking a can of beer, the New Romantics doing the hokey cokey on the beach in Bournemouth, all that sort of reality below the surface. There's a great photo shoot from Jamal Shabazz in New York, which is capturing, I guess, a really positive story about young black youth in New York. Often you hear so much negativity and it's all about the mean streets, but this is all about positivity and smiling faces. You just went on to the Spandau Ballet article there that was in Sounds. It was the first time Spandau Ballet ever featured in the media, and I think that's really interesting because they're talking a lot about being working class kids, and they don't want to conform to this idea that working class kids should be angry and downtrodden. They wanted to dress up and have fun and be flamboyant. What else? There's a good piece in there that I really like about Funhouse, which was a club in New York. It doesn't quite get the profiler coverage of things like The Loft and Paradise Garage, but it's a really interesting club. It had a very young clientele, bridge and tunnel, as they say in the US, all the suburban black and Latino kids coming in, but there was really fierce dancing going on there. A lot of new musics were born there as well. I could keep going, but that's some of the material in there.
That's a good one. If you could bring back one title, it doesn't need to be one, could be even two, which ones would you bring? Because I got to say, there's one piece from Smash Hits. I would love a proper Smash Hits today, but
I think,
what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the bringing it back bit is quite challenging because sometimes you think these things maybe should be kind of put on a pedestal where they are. But Smash Hits was an amazing title. It was such a rites of passage, certainly in this country and quite possibly in other parts of the world as well. I think at the time when I was, probably 11, 12, I just thought it was bright and colourful and had very cool haircuts and this conveyor belt of cool pop stars. But then when you read years later and hear years later what they were trying to do, you really understand they were trying to reinvent a new kind of understanding of pop music and a new understanding of culture, which really kind of keyed into the 1980s. I think Interview magazine, I don't know if is that still going? It seems to resurface, doesn't it? I'm not sure.
They're in a good iteration, I have to say.
They're in a good phase.
They're a good phase, yes.
Yeah, so I guess that's certainly served us well over the years.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What about in terms of the market? Because you were based kind of London, US, and New York.
Yeah.
How has been the reaction from the first issue? Because it feels to me that you have readers around the world, you may say.
Absolutely.
That, right?
Yeah, we have been selling copies around the world via our own online shop, but also via the distributors. I mean, the feedback has been amazing. I think what I've really liked about it is so many people have said they love the idea of it. When they receive it, they like it even more, which I think is a good thing. We're exceeding expectations in that sense. We've had quite a few well-known DJs and producers and record label owners purchase copies as well, which is great. It's as much as it's great to see it in a big pile, it's even more amazing to see it in situ in stores. So, I've been in New York and LA recently, and it's just lovely to see it there on the shelves. It makes all the work feel particularly well worth it.
And it's great news that the issue 2 is already in production.
Yeah.
So what's the idea? One issue every 6 months, or you tell me?
Good question. I think we would describe it more as and when, infrequent for now. We don't feel like we need to lock it down. It's in a sort of an old school magazine sense. But the next issue will be out certainly this side of Christmas in November. We're hard at work. I would say we're sort of 80% confirmed of what the contents is. The design duo of Lee and Dan are working with myself and Mark, and we're bringing it together. And we're enthusiastic. Yeah, it's about kind of moving it on, but we want to make sure there's a sort of a through line from issue 1 as well. We've got an event planned on the horizon as well. And yeah, just generally exploring where we can take No Way Back as if you want to call it a brand, a media entity as we go into 2026.
I love that. If you do an event, please play some Kraftwerk.
Absolutely, well. We will. First track we'll play.
Thank you, Andy. For more information, go buy issue 1 on nowayback.co. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks to our editor, Elliot Greenfield. If you have any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.